Good afternoon. On the it's the last day, it's my last day of SUSECON. I don't know about the rest of you guys. But my name is Jay Kremke. I am the product manager for SUSE Linux Enterprise on Power. It's a relatively new role for me. I just started with SUSE in March. Prior to that, I'd been a long time with IBM in the Power side. So it's definitely an area that I've been pretty familiar with. As I was discussing a moment ago, Power's been kind of an interesting platform for SUSE. It's a platform where there was a lot of promise, but not so much actual, kind of stuff happening. We always had a good level of things, but we didn't have that breakout hit until we got SAP HANA last year, in October of last year. And since then, we've seen a tremendous amount of interest and clients actually, running, like you guys, actually running SLES on HANA. And it's something that we enjoy. We like seeing customers actually using our stuff, particularly on Power Platform, which has got some excellent capabilities that fit very well for an SAP HANA type environment, including the reliability, the memory bandwidth, the memory capacity and capability. All of those things are really, really good for a workload like SAP HANA. To be honest, we also had a very strong SAP on Power environment, but that tended to be more on AIX rather than on Linux. So that's one where we also had some success. If you look at why these things are important to us, this focus on analytics for competitiveness is something that people have been talking about for a couple of years, or quite a few years now. For a long time, people were going after Hadoop. Now that seems to be kind of shifting towards Spark. But the bottom line is, to be able to be effective in business today, you really need to know a lot about your clients, what they're buying, why they're buying, what would perhaps influence them to buy more. All of those kind of things you need to get out of the data. And so you need to have an infrastructure that's actually capable of providing these kinds of insights. The other challenge is, while you're trying to do this, the amount of data goes up. The data volumes, the flow, and the real-time requirements go up. I had a customer that was doing business warehouse type data. They were doing fraud, or not fraud so much as money laundering analysis. They were a financial institution, and they had a very, very large environment that had a bunch of power as well as a mainframe, and their whole point was to go through all the transactions and look for patterns that might be money laundering so they could do investigation on it. This particular environment was growing, I believe, 60 terabytes a month. So it was really growing quickly. It was a large bank. And so they were processing a lot of data. And one of the kind of interesting challenges with this is that the company did not view that function as business critical because it wasn't transactional. And so they said, okay, we got this nice big environment. This is all fine. We don't need any high availability or backup because, if it goes down, company continues to run. Well, you can understand where this next story goes, right? So they ended up having an outage, a bad outage. It was actually more related to communications than anything else. But the bottom line was their BW was knocked down for about a week. And at the end of that week, they did manage to get it up, but it really opened their eyes up. And they figured out that if they had a worst case failure, like if somebody flew an airplane into their data center, that it would take them 6 months to actually get that BW environment up and running in full capacity, and that would cost them about $20 billion. So the business opportunity, the business risk of doing that. So after they got an awakening, they realized, gee, we need to, it's great that we're doing this stuff and it's non-transactional, but this data, this information, it really becomes so critical to their business that they decided, let's go buy a whole bunch of new power machines in a new data center and set up a replicated environment. And then they actually used failover to actually move to their new environment. So they actually did a real rigorous test. So the bottom line is, you think about something growing very, very fast like that, 60 terabytes a month. They were able to actually reduce that with some data compression at some point because it was eating them alive. But all this stuff you think, well, we'll just do this one time, it'll be fun. It doesn't really work that way. You have to think about these kind of workloads just like any other type enterprise workload you have in there. This is a horribly rendered chart, but some of the things that you can see here, the customer analytics. By the way, all these charts are uploaded, so you can get all of them. Customer relations, targeted marketing, those are things you think of as kind of driving additional new business. Operational management, these are the ones where I see the people that have the greatest risk, right? And that was in the case of this financial institution. They were able to continue to process things, but they put themselves into a position that if there had been some money laundering happen in their institution and they were unable to detect it, then they would have the regulatory agency, which in this particular country is extremely rigorous, looking down their throat. And once you get, it's like anything else, once people start looking at you, they're going to find other things. So it's really not the kind of a situation you want to be in. Okay, SUSE and IBM, obviously we offer a very good solution for this with SUSE on Power, and I talked about some of the kind of unique attributes that Power has around reliability, availability, scalability, being able to do things like catch memory errors and things like that. You heard some of that in Kathy Bennett's discussion this morning. Having worked on Power myself from Power 4 on, actually I had some time with the original Power, but the amount of reliability that was put into Power over the years is second really only to the mainframe, right? And in fact, a lot of the techniques that Power implemented on the hardware side and in the hypervisor were really, to be honest, stolen from the hardware, from the mainframe team. We actually, one of the chief engineers that worked on the mainframe reliability moved to Austin, Texas, became part of the Power team, and as an IBM fellow, he was actually driving a lot of the stuff that we did, starting with Power 4. Power 4 was really kind of the turning point. With Power 4, they started introducing things like first failure data capture, so that if you do have a problem, you can know what it is and fix it immediately, or even better yet, avoid problems because detecting when something's about to go bad. So Power's got a huge list of attributes around reliability. Obviously, performance is one of the key areas. For years and years, we had this kind of three-way fight between HP, Sun, and IBM on Power. And everybody would kind of pull ahead a little bit for 1 year, and then the other vendors would pull ahead a little bit. That made for a very, very high-performing type of environment. And in fact, I used to do a presentation where I compared the amount of processing power from a Power 6, 680, I think it was a 680. And if you looked at that, all of that processing power fit into the lowest tier Power 8 you could get with 6 cores. So, in a space of a couple of generations of the amount of compute capacity and performance available really drove up very highly. So we had the opportunity, to partner with IBM and their Linux Technology Center and other folks to be able to put Linux on there, put SUSE Linux on there, bring our own unique capabilities around open source, and be able to leverage the capabilities of the underlying hardware platform, which is work that continues on. Why do we want to do this? Obviously, increase reliability, reducing cost by maximizing utilization of hardware resources. This is one of the areas that Power and SUSE, have a real big advantage over some of the other platforms, particularly because of the hypervisor design in Power. You can run lots and lots of workloads in there and not have them bang on each other, not have them interfere with each other. When we first did LPARs with SAP, we had to do a really rigorous job with SAP to convince them that no, you really can run multiple workloads in the same box. SAP has acknowledged that, though up until recently, like this week, they said you can only have 4 LPARs running HANA. They just increased that to 8 with 2.0. High availability is another area that we provide some additional capability. We'll talk about a little bit later. And of course, reducing downtime with rapid recovery. So some of the unique attributes that SUSE, particularly with SLES 12, which is not yet available for HANA, we use the Btrfs file system, which allows you to administratively roll back changes. So if somebody gets in there and screws up something, administrator does an RM splat or something, in the wrong directory, you can actually flip the file system back and continue on. That's a really cool capability. Unfortunately, it's not available in SLES 11, but coming soon. All right. High performance, I talked about a lot of these things. I'll talk specifically about this large memory server reboot times as one of the attributes of SP2, application performance, visibility, customer business data. These are all kind of attributes on why this platform is especially good. Being able to move your applications to Little Endian is one of the challenges that IBM decided to take on a couple of years ago. So initially when IBM decided to do Linux on their platform, they wanted it to be Big Endian, same as AIX. And, by and large, most things were able to move pretty easily over from a Big Endian environment to a Little Endian environment, or vice versa, rather, Little Endian on, say, x86 over to Power. There were some applications that were coded in such a manner to make them extremely Endian dependent. And one of the things that IBM noticed over the past few years is a lot of the things that people were really using a lot of, like MongoDB, for example, didn't fit well into a Big Endian environment. And so IBM made the decision they wanted their OSs, or at least their Linux OSs, to move to Little Endian. We did that with SLES 12. Okay, a few years ago we came out with SLES 12 only for the Little Endian platform, only for Power 8. SLES 11 worked on Big Endian, in Big Endian mode on the other systems, and that will have an impact on your transition from SLES 11 to SLES 12 when you decide to do that. Okay, containers is another thing. I often get people, when I came into this job, people would say, when are we going to support containers on Linux on Power? And the answer was last release, SP1. SP1 had full release for Docker containers as part of our SUSE Linux Enterprise for Power. I'll talk about some of these other things here in a bit, but there are some kind of interesting innovations. One of the cool innovations with SUSE Linux has been our systems management tools, our inbound management tools that are in the system. Things like Zipper, for example, that do a very good job of doing dependency management, better than some of the other tools that were out there in the industry. We do have a long history, of course, with IBM going back to 2000. That's where we did the first Linux on the mainframe. And other than SAP HANA, Linux on the mainframe, SUSE Linux on the mainframe, has been extremely successful for both of us. The mainframe offers, a similar set of reliability and performance characteristics, but the big challenge that they had in the Z environment is that development of new software was really kind of limited. And so you were pretty much stuck with the old IBM favorites, the CICSs, IMSs, those kinds of things that had been around for generations. And what customers, the Z customers, realized is, hey, they wanted access to open source applications. And so SUSE, had made Linux available, many years before. And so it actually has become, in many cases, the predominant Linux operating system running on Z hardware. So if you look at some of the IBM notices, some of their reports, and they talk about how many MIPS are in things, they've been pretty consistently doing more MIPS on Z for Linux than it has been for ZOS. So it's been an extremely good story for them. Once again, it was because they had a definite need for applications that weren't available on their existing environment, and they had a very capable Linux operating system underwriting that. Now there are other Linuxes that have, come along, but we still own the vast majority of what gets deployed on Z, and I would say the vast majority of what gets deployed on Power now, really primarily based on SAP HANA. So SUSE Linux Enterprise 12 for Power, it came out a couple of years ago. What we're doing is the latest update to that, which is Service Pack 2. Some of the big events that happened over the time, I mentioned the August 2015 is when SAP finally certified HANA available for Power. That's on SLES 11 SP4. We did release SLES 12 earlier this year, and as I mentioned, with full support for Docker containers. One of the other things that happened that you may not be aware of is that we started supporting PowerPC Little Endian in PackageHub. So Scott Bailing is the guy that owns PackageHub, and he's got sessions available for it. But essentially what PackageHub provides is, if there's an open source package you would like to use on Power, and it's not part of SUSE already, you say, well, gee, I sure would like to use this. Well, how can you do that? Well, you can go out and pull the sources, start compiling, resolve the dependencies, resolve any other glitches you might have to fix in order to build a package. That's a laborious type of process, depending on the skills in your environment. You might never be able to pull it off. There's also a challenge sometimes that the organization that you belong to really is uncomfortable with that. I've worked with a number of customers where they've said, we really want to get that code from somebody that we trust. PackageHub gives us a way to do that, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But we do. No, PackageHub is completely open. All you have to have is basically go there and log into it, download it, and anybody can do that. I did do something last month around SLES 11 SP4. I'll talk about this more in a moment. SLES 11 SP4 still has about 2 years worth of support life in the normal life cycle. But it was starting to be kind of a challenge because with SAP HANA, people don't just put SAP HANA in and then move things very, very quickly. They want real long lifetimes, right? And in fact, I had customers earlier this year that said, okay, I want to do SAP HANA on Power, and I want a 5-year lifespan. I want to understand that I can be on that platform for 5 years because things move slow when SAP is involved in very, very large applications. Okay, SP2. You've probably seen other presentations on SP2 in much more detail than what I'm going to give you here. One of the key things is we did move the kernel up to 4.4. One of the differences between SUSE and some of our competitors is that we occasionally move forward on a new kernel within a release. Some of the competition thinks that they can backport everything to the old kernel. That can have mixed results. We do some backporting. In fact, we pulled back some code, I believe from 4.6 or 4.8 even, back into the 4.4 kernel. That's a lot easier than going way back to 3.8, where a lot of the underlying structures have changed. A lot of updates, usual kind of stuff. We do only support Little Endian with SLES 12 in general and SP2 as well. So only Power 8, only Little Endian mode. We do not have a Big Endian version of SLES 12. We did add a new architecture, the 64-bit ARM, which enabled us to do things like the Raspberry Pi, which was kind of fun. But that was actually one of the big drivers for moving up to a later level kernel. Okay, and first customer shipment this week, so you can download it now. All right, so what's new in kind of specifically around Power? There are a number of things here. I'll talk about this faster boot time for memory systems. This was actually a change that was initiated for a different platform, but once I saw it, I said, gee, that looks like that would be useful for Power. We did pick up support for some of the new Power LC systems. I'll give you more detail on that in a moment. The SUSE Linux Enterprise High Availability extension now became available with SP2. So the HA was not part of SP1, not part of the GA code. Wasn't, for any real large technical reason. It was that we simply didn't have the business reason to kind of move forward with it. We are adding that now. I'll talk about system role templates for installation and more about PackageHub. One of the big things, as I said, we added support for the high availability extension for SUSE Linux Enterprise. You could look at this and say this is kind of in anticipation of when we get SAP HANA on Power for Little Indian. It's one of the key things that is key components of SLES for SAP applications, one of the most important ones, I would say. So we did go through and add that as part of our support in SP2. I mentioned that we added the new LC systems. So IBM, my understanding is, as part of their Open Power initiative, they actually have other vendors that are producing power hardware. Typically, those other vendors will take the power platform, the power chip, and then use their own memory subsystems and things like that. What this is often focused on is delivering something at an extremely low cost. So they came out with the S812 LC and S822 LCs. Those are actually open power boxes that are branded under the IBM name. So they have the lower cost. And once again, this is a desire by IBM to drive power into some of the areas where a traditional IBM branded and badged with all the RAM and everything that IBM ships is being kind of makes them a little difficult to price. The L models, as well as the traditional enterprise servers, have already long been supported by Power or by SUSE for Power. IBM is talking about Power 9, so there's already some of that work that's kind of going into the systems in anticipation of the Power 9, which I don't know when IBM thinks so. I think they said they hope to have some by next year, is what they've said publicly. I guess we'll see how that works out and what they come up with. But the nice thing about these boxes, like I said, is an extremely low cost. So if you've got an opportunity to do something other than SAP HANA, file print sharing, just kind of routine applications, those LCs are going to be able to get you down at a very, very attractive price point. We obviously wanted to be there. Okay, faster boot time for large memory systems. As I introduced a moment ago, this was actually something that I noticed after I became product manager, after I came to SUSE, and I was looking through the features that we had in SP2, and this one was not targeted for Power, but once I looked at it, I said, this really is probably a good thing for Power. And so we got the IBM team to do some additional testing for us. Effectively, what happens is when you boot a system, kind of a standard prior to SP2 system with SUSE, it takes one processor and it goes through the boot process. And the memory initialization was all happening with that single processor. Okay. What this does is when it gets to the point of memory initialization, it actually fires up the other processors that are available and puts them to work doing memory initialization. So effectively, we've taken a single-threaded task and made it multi-threaded. On Power, Power actually had a very efficient memory initialization system, so it didn't have as big of an impact on Power as it did on some of the other architectures, but we have seen in some cases up to 57% faster than we saw without this change in effect. Now, 57% faster, like I said, it's dependent on system configuration. The reason why I wanted it is IBM, of course, is shipping very, very large memory configurations, like 32 terabytes. And so if you think about it, you have, some kind of bad outage, a power failure or something like that, you might be sitting on your hands a while waiting for the memory to get initialized. So this is one of those things I thought was going to be a real good opportunity for us to kind of speed up the operation. And in line actually with today's theme in SUSECON, you noticed they had themes, they told us we had themes about reliability and recovery. So this is one of the things that fits very nicely into that theme. Okay, system role template-based server installation. Well, that's a really ugly title. That is as good as I could come up with. What this really says is that installation time, you can make decisions based on a template. So let's say that you're putting together an environment that's going to be a multi-user environment, kind of a traditional Unix environment, where you want to have a pretty big /home to be able to handle the users. That's something you want to put in a system configuration. You can say, okay, I want a home. I want it to be a really big home. Alternatively, maybe you've got a server application. Maybe it's an application that only has 2 or 3 users on it, maybe a database user and a root user, maybe that's it. In that case, I don't need a home at all, so don't give me one. I'll just use it out of the root file system. So what this template really gives you is a way to kind of customize, the future installation. So you create the template and you say, okay, this is going to be a database server, therefore don't need a /home, need a whole bunch of other stuff other places. Now, we obviously have a lot of other more sophisticated tools with things like SUSE Manager, where you could get even more in depth, but this is a nice kind of a lightweight way to do some customization during your installation process. All right, PackageHub. Let's talk more about PackageHub. So I mentioned a moment ago that we now have PackageHub available for the PowerPC Little Endian, so the SLES 12 and above. Effectively what happens with the PackageHub is that someone will nominate a package and say, gee, I'd like to have this package on Power. We go through the process. The community kind of says, okay, let's build this thing and put it together and actually make it available. SUSE actually has control over what gets published. So somebody can come in there and say, okay, I want this spam generator to be out there. It might even get built, but SUSE is going to go, I don't think we need one of those, right? So let's not do that. So it's not like we're inspecting all the code and stuff, but we are kind of setting a level of quality there and functionality, and the things that we're doing there are things that are generally going to be useful to the community. Now you might say, well, why don't you put all that stuff in SUSE? Well, number one, it's a lot of stuff, which may not be appropriate to the broader SUSE market or financially supportable by us. These are not supported packages. But in some cases, we will see cases where things that came through PackageHub first will eventually become supported offerings, okay? And I know that we actually are doing some stuff on some other architectures around high-performance computing where this is a way to get kind of standardized packages out there really, really quickly. And then, if we have sufficient demand across our user community, those can be much more easily become part of a future release of SUSE. There is no additional charge to use these things, and you actually have channels set up, so you can actually use your channels to install them. So it's not like you have to go somewhere, get a file, and actually install the RPM manually. This gives you a lot easier ease of use, number one, and number two, since it's had some approval and scrutiny by SUSE, your organizations probably feel a lot more comfortable about you picking that up and using it as opposed to some other things. Package available, including multiple releases. I don't know what that says, other than the fact we put it out there and it stays out there. So this was initially made available, PackageHub was made available, I believe, last year. It was before my time, on the x86 platform. It's now available also for PowerPC Little Endian and ARM. I don't know if Z. They probably did it for Z too. Can't remember. Question? Is the list where you can see what is supported on Power? Yeah. So you can go in and see what already. Yeah. If you go to packagehub.suse.com, you can actually list the packages that are available by architecture, so you can look at it. I'm blithed with that name because I actually went over and talked to Scott Bailing, the guy that owns this, and I said, Scott, I can't find PackageHub on Google. And I went to Google and I searched for PackageHub, Package Space Hub, all sorts of things, and I find his presentations, I find all sorts of things, but apparently the SEO for that particular web page is not good. But packagehub.suse.com, that'll get you there. No spaces, packagehub.suse.com. Okay, let's talk about long-term support subscription. So I mentioned this earlier. So as I mentioned at the beginning, I came in March. I'm also the product manager for ARM. So I had a whole bunch of stuff to do there because there was no product manager for ARM. Power had Marcus Kraft, who also does our Z platform, kind of keeping things moving along. So I didn't really have to do too much with Power kind of in the first 60 days. But one of the things I did start to hear about from the sales team was they were selling SUSE Linux Enterprise for SAP HANA, and people were saying, I need a 5-year lifespan. And so you get here, and you count 1, 2, and a big drop-off, okay? Because the end of standard support for SP4 is scheduled for March 2019. And so nobody needs this support right now, but people wanted to be assured that they were going to have long-term support available, so I created an offering to do that. So we now have long-term support for March of 2019 to March of 2022. So if you're currently, like these guys, on SLES 11 with SAP HANA, you know that you've got a nice long runway ahead of you. Normally, one release to another, even for something like SAP, you'd say, well, they probably don't need it. They ought to just move up to the next one. As I mentioned earlier, SLES 11 is big Indian, okay? SLES 12 is little Indian. So if you're currently a SAP HANA customer, you're on a big Indian OS, which means that when it becomes time to move to SAP on little Indian, you're going to have a new OS, a new release of SAP HANA, and a data conversion. So the data has to go through a data conversion because it's big Indian today, it'll move to little Indian. All of those things are things that SAP knows how to do well, but I know, if you've got a great big HANA environment, you're not going to say, well, let's just give this a try and see if it works. It's going to be something, it's going to take you, probably a year to get through your planning committee to even do that. So I wanted to give plenty of time for our existing HANA customers to make that transition. I did have some sales guys saying, why in the heck are you selling LTSS now that won't even go into effect for 2 years? It's really all about letting our customers know that we got their back. We're going to have them supported throughout the time period that they might need. Okay, migration approaches. If you're currently on SP1 to SP2, we've got a number of different migration approaches that are pretty painless in relative terms. Note, however, like I said, if you're on SLES 11 today, you're not going to be able to do an upgrade or a migration. What you're going to have to do is stand up a new instance of SLES 12 and move your workloads towards it. That's not an unusual approach anyway for an enterprise app, so that's probably no big surprise. So we do have ways to move forward once you get up there. The general lifecycle model for SUSE Linux Enterprise is really up to 13 years of support, so that's 10 years of standard support, plus 3 years of long-term service pack support. The service packs themselves generally tend to have about an 18-month life cycle, depending on how often we redo the service pack. What happens is, so right now, let's say that you're on SP1 now, we just announced SP2, you're going to get 6 months of overlap between them. So when SP3 comes out, you're going to get 6 months of overlap. When SP4 comes out, you're going to get 6 months of overlap. Okay, that's just the standard SUSE life cycle. The variable in this is exactly when the service packs come out, because they don't all come out in the same calendar time per year. And in fact, some service packs, if you look at Service Pack 2 and think about the content that went into it, we implemented a new architecture, we moved to a new kernel, there were a lot of other changes. SP2 was, in a development type and a QA type viewpoint, a pretty heavy thing, right? And we did that really since, SP1 came out early this year, so we actually did pretty rapidly. SUSE, from my understanding, kind of does what Intel calls tick-tock. Okay, so you'll get a really hefty release, and then you'll get one that's more of a consolidation release where you're really just focusing on bug fixes and stability, and then kind of going through those different releases. So we just released SP2. I'll talk more about what we're doing with SP3 in a moment. This is just more GURP about what happens during those different periods. Like I said, all of these charts are available for you. That's our lifecycle page. So we do have the SUSE.com/lifecycle that tells you where everything goes. Some of these things, for example, are not tied to a specific service pack. So for example, SLES for SAP applications is not tied to SP1, SP2, SP whatever. It is really, or even to SLES 11 or SLES 12. It's really just tied to the application itself. What that means is you buy SLES, you buy SUSE for SAP applications today for SLES 11. When you go to SP12, you don't have to rebuy it, okay, other than maintaining your subscription. But like I said, I don't even have the good thing on here that shows SLES 11. Oh well, never mind. I already mentioned, though, that it's through March. Excuse me. Okay, so what's next for SLES for Power? I mentioned SP3. We're currently doing a feature kind of introduction, you know, where we work with IBM and some of the other partners to figure out what we need to have in Service Pack 3. So that work is going on today. As I said, there's typically always some new hardware enablement that IBM wants us to do. There's some additional kind of functionality around taking advantage of some of the other hardware features, like flash memory, for example, that are always kind of part of that release or will be part of the release. So we're going through that today. We are having discussions around SLES 13. If you saw my manager, Matthias Eckermann, he's got a session where he talks about that, and Simona Arsenia, she is also talking about that, about what we're planning to do with SLES 12. We've got some kind of interesting thoughts about what we need to do with SLES 12. There are traditional Linux environments like we have today for SAP HANA that really rely on a monolithic type of operating system. There are other use cases, an increasing number of use cases, where we see people that want much more configurable operating systems. So in other words, much smaller operating systems that we have today, where they can kind of pick and choose which components go into that. So that's one of the things we're looking at, doing both of those in SLES 13. SAP HANA for SLES 12. Well, we're waiting for SAP. Okay, and in fact, we were rather surprised when SAP announced HANA 2.0 at SAP TechEd this week and made zero mention of any hardware platforms, because we were kind of expecting we'd hear SLES 12 in there. We haven't heard that yet. I don't know when they'll do that, but I expect that they will probably do that relatively quickly. So the idea is they would come out with an SAP HANA for SLES 12. Existing customers like you guys are probably going to stay on SLES 11 for a while until you let all the dust settle out and figure out what your transition plan is, and new customers will probably start with that at some point. But I can't tell you anything definite because SAP hasn't announced anything. And in fact, I have no insights into SAP other than rumors and innuendo. So I really don't know when they're going to do it. I wish they'd done it this week, but they didn't. So we do expect that to come out. That's kind of the major things we're looking at around Power. I mentioned Power 9 enablement is something that's already starting to sneak in. You know, sometimes I know specifically they say I want to do Power 9 enablement. Other times it's just stuff that, you know, features that come in from IBM that, you know, just actually are putting in foundation work.
What's the preferred hypervisor?
Well, the preferred hypervisor for SAP is PowerVM. So PowerVM is the hypervisor that's based on top of their IBM firmware. For the Open Power boxes, they run on open firmware. It's called Opal. That is available, and in those environments, you would run something like KVM on top of it. IBM also had a KVM version they called Power KVM. They released a couple of years ago. They have indicated that they are going to move that to end of life. So one of our other evaluations that we're looking at is for customers using KVM, Power KVM today, should we just go ahead and enable the KVM that we already have in Linux for them? We didn't do it because IBM had a competing one, and you know, we want to be a good partner and do what they want. So I would not be surprised if we had our own KVM supported on Power, since they've announced that they're kind of wiping out the other one. Looks like they made a decision to transition to vendors KVM instead of their own. I don't know the full story behind it, but that's what it looks like. They certainly have withdrawn it, I know that, or announced that it's going to be withdrawn. That's it. So questions, what questions you got? Yep.
About license, is there a change in that? Is there still a software or is it changed?
There is no change in the licensing. I would say from my own personal point of view, having done Power for a long time and actually taught classes in licensing for Power, I really find socket-based licensing to be a terrible anachronism, but I didn't introduce myself as the vice president in charge of partner at the beginning of this presentation. So yeah, we're using socket-based pricing with Power. We'll see how that goes. You know, one of the things that if you look across all platforms, not just Power, but if you look at x86, etc., every platform, you know, when socket-based pricing became prevalent in the industry, and this is really an industry prevalence, most sockets had, you know, at most 6 cores in them, and we see that the number of cores every generation is going up and up and up. There are some things like Knight's Landing and Intel that I think have 90 cores or some ridiculous amount. So it's something that I think the industry will have to adopt. Unfortunately, the industry expects it today, and so that's where we are. So yeah, I'd like a much more rational core-based pricing, but I ain't in charge of that. Questions? Nope? No? Yeah.
There's a new power box called Minsky, or codenamed Minsky, with a couple of Nvidia GPUs.
Nvidia GPUs, yeah, it's an Open Power based box. Nvidia is somewhat problematic for us. Nvidia tends to like to release things as binary blobs with no open source, no source code available, and that is antithetical to our, you know, to our whole process, our whole purpose around open source, and so it makes it difficult for us to support those. IBM did not ask us to support those particular boxes. I think they partnered with Canonical exclusively on those, so I don't have any near-term plans to do anything with that. I've reached out and, you know, tried to have some discussions with Nvidia, but you know, I don't see a near-term kind of path for us there. Yeah.
What about, like, I know that I just was on a call last week where, you know, SUSE was announcing that working with Intel on the new next generation interconnects. What about OpenCAPI?
I don't know. I do have some requests around CAPI, and we've been doing some underlying enablement around CAPI, but I don't know that I have a real driving consumer of it at this point. So I think IBM has done some asked us to do some enablement there, but I don't have a real driver to consume it. It's a nice technology. I just don't have a consumer for it, so it makes it kind of, you know, why do it? Exactly, right. You know, other things that we certainly are talking about seriously is live patching. Live patching we don't have yet available on the Power platform. It's not a technical reason, it's really just a business justification for doing it. I would suspect that, or my personal view is that once we get SAP HANA on 12, on SLES 12, that live patching becomes instantly very attractive for us. So I would expect we'd do it. It's not a technical thing. It's really just a business decision. What do we want to do the QA on it, and have the support teams ramped up to do that, because it does have an impact on our support end of the business. All right. Other questions? Cool. You have 15 minutes and 26 seconds back. Go to the bar, knock back a couple of beers and some shooters, and then go to the next session. All right, thank you very much.